Hi, it's Karoline, and this channel talks all about CPTSD, which is complex PTSD. It is different from regular PTSD. It's different because it has additional symptoms that come with it, and this is because the trauma has been chronic. It has been ongoing. It's a trauma that's lived over and over again, and it continues. So, for example, in abusive kinds of situations, in neglect, in abandonment, in childhood or in adulthood, that is CPTSD. That's what I'm focusing on in this channel because that is what I struggle with myself. I am a fellow sufferer of CPTSD, and although I have been working on it for a very long time, I've learned a lot of things. I am still in the middle of it. I have picked up a book that we're working through. This book is called The Dialectical Behavior Therapy Skills Workbook for CPTSD, written by Sherry Van Dyke, because she is helping me to learn the skills that I need and helping me to understand how I can live a better, more joyful life and ditch some of the symptoms that I have been experiencing my whole life. I also have the link below for the book if you would like to purchase that book and do this work along with me. Today we're going to be talking about different symptoms between CPTSD and PTSD. CPTSD is not officially recognized in the DSM, which is the manual that is used for assigning diagnosis. So if you go to a counselor or therapist, they may not diagnose you with CPTSD because they may not consider it a thing. However, in the ICD, which is another book that classifies conditions, but it is published by the World Health Organization, and that is used more widely throughout the world, the IC does recognize the CPTSD. I just am telling you that to give you some validation. So if you do talk to a counselor, please make sure that they are trauma informed. Please make sure that they are acknowledging the contribution of complex PTSD and how that is affecting your life. Or you may not see, in my personal opinion, you may not see the progress that you want to see in your counseling work. I've been to lots of counselors. I have been working on this for a long time, and I'm sharing these things and having this channel so that I can hopefully help you to not have to go through the years that I have gone through to learn what I have learned. I am not a professional. I am not a licensed mental health worker. I am studying to do that. I'm in a master's program right now, but that does not make me an expert. So please take the information that I give you and do some research on your own and consult with your therapist or mental health worker that you're working with. Also, I want to offer that if we're going to do trauma work, some things may pop up for you like they have for me. I started, even in the very first chapter, I started feeling some tension rise, and I started seeing that some of my symptoms pop up. I started running for sugar. I started grabbing for things that I used to calm myself down. The better way to calm myself down, and things that are going to be taught further in this book, but one of the things that we can do to calm our nervous system down and be able to do this work is to use grounding techniques. And one of those grounding techniques can be simple breathing exercises where you stop and you do some box breathing, and that's breathing in for 4 to the count of 4, holding it for the count of 4, and then breathing out to the count of 4. There's other forms of breathing exercises you can do, which you can look up. I also developed this bracelet to help me and you work through grounding when we're having those emotions start to rise, to bring our nervous system back to regulation and get it where it needs to be so that we can continue doing the work without being so triggered and turning to some really unhealthy behaviors to handle the trauma. Okay, so this bracelet is designed to do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding method, and that's 5. There's 5 beads on the bracelet sectioned off. Those 5 beads are to help me to remember to look around the room and find 5 things that I see. Then there's 4 beads, 4 things that I can touch. That's 3 things that I can hear, 2 things that I can smell, and 1 thing that I can taste. This bracelet is giving me a tactile way that I can touch the bead and I can focus on the environment around me, get myself regulated, get myself calmed down so that I can proceed with the work that I'm doing for my mental health. It also comes in handy any other time if I'm not doing mental health work and I'm just out and about and I'm experiencing anxiety, stress, overwhelm, panic, or if I'm having a really hard time focusing. This can be used for helping with ADHD. I will put a link below. I do sell them in my store that is called Absolutely Positively Me. It has been a huge lifesaver, and I encourage you, whatever method you use, when you're doing trauma work, when you're doing mental health work, that you first regulate your system. And anytime that things start, rising and the emotions start coming to the surface, that you pause and take time to regulate your system and work through those emotions and help yourself to feel okay in doing this work. If these things are too deep, if they're too difficult to handle on your own, some of the trauma that we've experienced is really a nightmare. And if this becomes overwhelming, please stop and please seek help. Seek a counselor, find a counselor who can help you through this work. Let's talk about the differences between PTSD and CPTSD. A person who's suffering from PTSD may re-experience symptoms. So they may have distressing dreams or nightmares related to that original traumatic event. They may have flashbacks or intense images that continue to replay in their mind. And it could actually feel like you're reliving the experience. People with PTSD, they avoid things. They avoid internal reminders of the experience. So they avoid the thoughts they're thinking. They avoid the feelings and the physical sensations in their body. They detach from those things. And they avoid external reminders of the experiences. So they could start isolating. They can avoid people, places, conversations, situations. And the third part of PTSD is that they have a sense of threat. They can be startled easily. They can be jumpy. They can be hyper alert and be on guard, be watchful for something that is dangerous or something that is threatening. Now, CPTSD adds on to those three things. So with those three things, the person also can have difficulty managing their emotions. So this is because their nervous systems are highly dysregulated. They might explode in anger. They may shut down and feel numb. They might have difficulties in calming or soothing themselves and turning to things to do those things. And usually those are kind of destructive things. For me, it is eating, especially sugar. That's what I turn to calm myself down and to bring down my nervous state. They have a negative self-view. So having a negative self-view, it's like they label themselves. They're called like core beliefs. So I'm worthless, I'm a failure. They can have feelings of guilt or shame. They can feel helpless. Those kinds of things become kind of a core identity of who they are. Also, they can have difficulties in relationships or feeling close to others. So they can avoid relationships or they can get into relationships that are extremely unhealthy. So these things on top of PTSD, and those are the major differences between the two. Again, what brings these things about? Most of these things started in childhood as we were developing. And because our brains were in a developmental state, our brains adapted to what they call adverse childhood experiences. Okay, so traumatic experiences, bad experiences in childhood, right? So these things could include psychological, physical, or sexual abuse, violence against the mother. Like if you witnessed, I guess it could be against a father or a family member, but violence against somebody else, even if the violence is not happening to you. Living with people who abuse substances, had mental health problems. So these kinds of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs as they're called, they can be interpreted by a child's developing brain as trauma. And when those ACEs are constant, continuing, that is where the chronic part or the complex part comes in. Our brains found adaptive ways of dealing with the stressful situations that we were in. And those adaptive ways served us at the time, but they maybe are not serving us now. Again, for example, with my weight, maybe as a child, my tendency to search for food or sugar as a comfort served me at the time because it got me through that trauma as a comfort. It was a way of helping me through that trauma, but the trauma doesn't happen now. It's not going on now. And so that's maladaptive. It does not help me and it's not serving me, but I still have that programmed in that's how I deal with or how I cope with stressful situations, or just how I live my life altogether, because that is my mode of, that's my worldview. That is my programming. That is how I live my life according to that programming from my childhood. So it's important to note that the adverse childhood experiences may not always be intentional. It is not always the result of abuse. It could be because the parent is dealing with mental health issues on their own. It could be because they are relying on the child for support with those issues. It could be that the parent is just not available for whatever life situation has thrown their way. So it's not always intentional, or that the abuse or the neglect or the abandonment has happened. And just, I wanted to point that out because I think that some of us will tend to excuse our parents or a situation or say, no, that wasn't trauma because we know that it wasn't on purpose, or we know that we're dealing with their own crap, right? But it doesn't take away from the effect that it had on us as children, whether it was intentional or not. And I just wanted to point that out there. The effects are very real, and the symptoms that we experience are very real, regardless of the intended impact when the abuse or the situation happened to us. I also want to point out that abuse can take different forms. So if you're just thinking in your mind that, I wasn't abused because I wasn't hit, that, physical abuse is just one kind of abuse. Emotional abuse can be, constantly listening to derogatory comments or negating your right to feel or your right to experience something. That's emotional abuse. I just want to open up the conversation for the experiences that you may be having, that you may be discounting because you think that it's been in a category that it's not as bad as somebody else's. The thing is if you're experiencing trauma symptoms, it was real for you. Even if you weren't really in a life-threatening situation or in a really threatening situation, if your mind and your body perceived a threat, if you perceived a trauma, it is real for you. I want you to be okay with that and not feel like you have to brush it off, that you shouldn't feel what you're feeling. You have a right to feel what you're feeling, and you have a right to experience it, and you have a right to label it, and you have a right to heal it. Okay, so some of the effects that can be developmental, delays from people who experience CPTSD. There's actually studies that show that the amygdala, which is the alarm center of our brain, is larger. It's bigger in youth that have experienced hostile environments growing up. Also, the levels of stress hormones are bigger. So there are physical ways that we can manifest these things, not just emotional ways, things that our bodies have not developed in a normative way. Okay, I also want to point out that these are normal adaptive behaviors that our brains developed to help us through situations that were hard, that were scary, that were difficult. And these adaptive ways, though they may not be serving us now, like I mentioned before, could have served us in the past. Now, because of that, sometimes children will be, and maybe adults, misdiagnosed with what is really going on. It may not be seen as a result of trauma. It may be seen as ADHD or bipolar or oppositional defiant disorder. And it's possible that medication is prescribed that is not addressing the real core issue. Again, I'm not an expert. And those are things that you can talk to your medical provider about. But just to open that discussion and to open up the awareness that sometimes we are diagnosed with things that the root cause comes down deeper to trauma experiences that have not been resolved and handled. Okay, so in the workbook, as you're going through the workbook and you're reading her explanation of things, she actually talks, there's a big section about the risk factors for trauma. I found that section very, very helpful because it kind of helped me see that there wasn't just one thing that made me more susceptible to trauma, but there were many different aspects that impacted my trauma experience. Don't ignore your emotions and shut them down. I know that some of us are just absolutely really good at just pushing it aside. Please give yourself the space to feel those emotions, but also please do it safely so that your body is regulated and that you are able to handle those emotions in a safe way. The next thing that we're going to be talking about, the next chapter that is in this book, is talking about dissociation, where we separate ourselves from ourselves in situations and things like that. It goes into that very deeply. It has been a very helpful chapter, helping me to understand myself and understand how I'm relating to the world and how some of the symptoms are manifesting in my life. And so please follow me, please subscribe, and stay tuned for the next video so that we can walk through and learn these things together and heal together. I wanted to end with this final thing that I forgot to say in my last video. The author does give the stages of working through trauma, because these are the stages that she's going to be taking us through in this book. And the first stage is safety and stabilization. And that was me encouraging you to do some of that grounding and centering yourself. We're going to learn a lot more about stabilizing ourselves and keeping ourselves safe during that. The second part is actually resolving the trauma. Some of that trauma, because of the difficulty and the depth of the trauma that we have experienced, will need to be worked with a counselor. But because I've already done a lot of work with counselor, I am ready to do this work on my own, and I will proceed through the book on doing that part. And then the third stage is integration, and that is how we are pulling the skills and the healing that we've experienced into our daily lives so that we can have, not struggle with some of the things we've been struggling with. Take care of yourself. You deserve the very best. I want you to not listen to the voices in your head that are telling you that you're not worthy, you're not good enough. I want you to not listen to the voices in your head that may be saying that you shouldn't feel the way you should feel. I want you to know that there is somebody else out there who is struggling with these things and that we can do this together, that there is hope, and I will see you next time.